Hello and welcome to episode 121 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. How are you doing, Sigmund?
I'm doing good. 2 weeks before Worldwide Developers Conference, at the time that this publishes. Getting very, very excited. Equally very nervous, Devon. I think this happens to us every year. Just because I don't know if this is going to be an exciting year for tvOS and Apple TV, or if it's going to be a bit of a dull one. One thing I think we know for certain is that this Worldwide Developers Conference is going to be exciting when it comes to visionOS. And something happened to me this past week where I got super excited once again for Apple Vision Pro because we got more immersive video content. I wanted to open up this episode by talking about it. We'll talk about parkour in a minute, but Experience Immersive had somewhat of a stealth upgrade this week. An improved runtime of 3 minutes 49 seconds in length and plenty of impressive new additions, including, for the sports fans, golf, NFL Super Bowl, numerous NBA spots as well. But there was a lot more to it than that, especially when it came to nature and what's going to be next for the Adventure series. What did you think? And were you as surprised as I was?
I was very surprised to see the new footage. It all looks great. The sports stuff is very fun. My main question watching the sports content was, how did they get a camera there? Because we've seen the cameras they're using for this content, and they're huge. And some of the shots they were getting were just really impressive. I love the perspectives, including that one of the golf shot where you're like at the level of the hole, seeing the ball go in. That was really cool. But what excited me most was that they seem to be teasing an upcoming episode of the Nature series, all about elephants. And I just can't wait to see that. I love those little shots of the elephants in the teaser there, and I can't wait to see that episode. Hopefully that's the next one they've got in their queue for immersive content. I didn't catch the hint of the next adventure episode, though. What was that about?
Well, if you look at the artwork for this new revamped Experience Immersive, you get like what I think is someone on a wakeboard going through the water, and in fact the artwork is very much that encapsulated in the Apple Vision Pro headset, right? And so I'm very excited about that, because actually one of the things that I really want to see Apple's immersive video do is more underwater scenes. I think that would be amazing. That's really what I've been waiting for, and I think that's what we're getting next. I was blown away, of course, by the sports because I'm a sports fan. But yeah, the elephants, give it to me now. But also, just the moments where you're following that toddler that's going around on their stroller. These little things, I just think they're incredible. And I'm really interested to see where Apple go with immersive video, but also, of course, visionOS. I think they are going to be things that we're going to talk about maybe ever so briefly next week when we have our predictions for Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference 2024. And last week we had a ton of wishes from previous years for tvOS and Apple TV. Lots that I don't imagine we will see this year, but I think a few may just burst through the net and become a reality. Of course, because we do this every year, we cannot not add to our wishes. We started with our wishes last week, talking about what the developers need, because of course we are heading into a developer conference, even though the Apple TV is very consumer front facing as a device and as a software experience. But we need to talk about what needs to be put in for developers. And I think I'm going to start by just saying that we need full Swift tools and WebKit support. We need to remove the limitations of Apple TV. And it feels like, on a software level, that Apple TV is being treated very much like the hardware that it once was, right? It was the lower end chips that were still available in production. And as we've gone through the different generations, we are now on some super powerful chipsets. It does feel like everything is kind of catching up as Apple Silicon gets better and better. And so I would love to see these limitations that had been in. The current Swift tools, they're almost like forks of the full Swift tools that you would get on iOS. Very limited in scope. And for that reason, there are also other limitations in the software that we wanted to bring up. And one in particular that was brought up recently by the one Riley Testert, who recently talked with the team on Mac Stories.
Yeah, this is an issue that's really come to the forefront with game emulation coming to the App Store. And when RetroArch released on the Apple TV, this is something that people ran into almost immediately. And that's the issue of apps not having persistent storage in tvOS. And so apps have a certain amount of space that they can take up for their files, games, and game saves and things like that. But at any time, those files can be purged by the system to make space for other things. And obviously that doesn't make for a great experience when you're a couple hours into your favorite classic game and suddenly you have to start over, right? And that's an issue not only for players, but also, of course, for developers who are getting angry support emails from people saying, you lost my game, where did it go and how do I get it back? And of course, it's a limitation of the OS, not the apps. And so if emulation is really going to take off on the Apple TV, and there's other categories of apps that would benefit from this as well, obviously, it's just the case that's come up most recently, but really apps need persistent storage on tvOS to exist in a lot of different categories, and that's what Riley was talking about. A lot of people would love to see Delta come to tvOS and play their classic Nintendo games up on the big screen, but it's just a non-starter as long as there's not that persistent storage for the app to keep games and game saves in. So that's something I'm honestly amazed that this is still a limitation on tvOS. It feels like something that's just a bygone era of, like you were talking about, the older chips and just older specs of previous Apple TV hardware where the base storage could be very low and barely enough to really store your streaming apps and maybe the couple of arcade games or something like that you have on there. But these days you can buy Apple TVs with a massive amount of storage, plenty enough to cover a few emulation games and other apps that need persistent storage. So I think this is something that should be reconsidered and would really open up, again, something we talk about a lot, open up the entire tvOS platform to whole new categories of apps that just couldn't exist before.
Absolutely, and we will get into those categories a little bit later on. But let's talk about what the Apple TV does very well, and that is video and audio, right? Except of one glaring omission, and that is the ability to bitstream audio. This has been echoed by listener Rick Williams this week, who wrote to us saying, honestly, my most wanted feature is being able to bitstream True HD plus Atmos and DTSX, which are all audio formats that are available on Blu-ray and through high-end AVR receivers and even some soundbars. You will get a really special audio experience, especially if you've got the equipment in which to listen to it. But also, it's not just a OS thing, right? So when we're talking bitstream and DTSX, we're talking about what the likes of Infuse Player could do with files that you've ripped from your own media. I would imagine if Apple were to introduce this, they would introduce it when they have their own channel in which to be able to deliver it. And we talked about this before in terms of downloads and the ability to be able to download offline content. Carrying on from audio, spatial audio upmixing for non-spatial audio supported content. We get this with music on iOS. I would love to see this for films. This is something that I hadn't really thought about up until Sonos when they announced their new Ace headphones. And one of the abilities the Ace headphones have when pairing with their soundbar is the ability to be able to up-res any audio, like TV audio, to spatial audio. It'll be really interesting to see how that works in practice, but in theory, it sounds like something that I'd love to see. And kind of tying in with that, another wish for video and audio this year is the ability to be able to take the output from your audio return channel, so ARC or eARC, and send that to connected AirPods. We can do that at the moment with HomePods, so literally anything that is connected to a TV with your Apple TV connected to the ARC port and HomePods, the Apple TV is able to process that audio from any other connected devices on your TV and push that audio through. I would love to see this come to AirPods. I think more people probably own AirPods than they do HomePods. And I think that would be really, really cool, especially for the gamers amongst us that like to play on their consoles. That would solve an issue. Devon, I think you've got one for us before we close off this segment.
I do. My wish for this year, as far as video and audio, is the ability to set per app video and audio player settings in tvOS, or even for those settings to just say for that particular app that you're using. So in my use case, when I'm watching shows on my Apple TV, there are different kind of configurations I have for different apps. When I'm watching Netflix, I only watch Netflix when my son's asleep. That's just how it works out. And when he's asleep, I want the audio to be very low and I want captions on. But then when he's awake and I'm watching something maybe on Disney Plus, maybe I want the audio higher with the captions off because I don't need that additional information. And so the ability to set those settings and have them persist, I think would be really helpful. Right now, it's a little bit of a mismatch. Apps that use the default video player will save some of those settings across apps. That is helpful in some sense, but I'd actually like to be able to set those per app rather than just based on what player an app is using. There are even some streaming services, I think Netflix does this, where it'll save your settings across devices. So if I turn on subtitles on my iPad, it'll actually enable it on my account on other devices as well, which is kind of cool. But really, I think just the option in settings to go in and just tweak those and get those exactly the way I want and have them persist across uses of different apps would be really helpful. And maybe that's just my use case, but I've just found that I use different apps in certain ways over and over. And as much as I appreciate how easy it is to go into the video player and change those things quickly, if I didn't have to, if they could just be ready for me the way I want them each time, that would be really helpful.
So it's really interesting. When I was looking at the list, I wasn't quite sure what you were saying. I was wondering if it was too complicated, right, for the system that Apple normally implement. But this is really, really compelling. This might be the use case that would propel third-party apps to finally adopt multi-user, right, via iCloud. There's also some really compelling accessibility use cases here, right? In the sense that if I'm logged into my profile and I want subtitles, or I need dim flashing lights, or certain colors on my subtitle options, or certain font sizes, they're just going to be there. They're going to be persistently there. And again, there's another reason for me to log into my profile and not mess up someone else's up next queue. So there's so much here. I love this pick, Devon. Yeah. Per app video and audio player settings. It makes perfect sense. And I'm surprised it's not there already.
Well, thank you very much, Sigmund. I'm glad you liked my wish, and hopefully it'll come true this year. Speaking of the video player, of course, one place where we spend a lot of time with that video player is the TV app. You have any wishes for the TV app this year?
Do I, Devon? Do I? Yeah, I mean, there's tons, right? I think we saw that big revamp last year. I don't think we're going to see too much in terms of design changes this year. I may be wrong. Maybe that was like an in-between phase that we're in. We'll see. But the thing that was missing during that whole revamp and taken away from us was gifting and wish lists in the TV app. They were, for the time being, siloed in the TV shows and movies apps, which are still there for that functionality, specifically on tvOS. And that's great for existing lists. But when it comes to gifting, there is absolutely no way of being able to gift something from the share sheet like there had been for years and years and years before. And I can only imagine that taking away the ability to gift a film or a TV show to a friend is costing Apple money. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really strange omission. I'm surprised it wasn't fixed. I have put in so many requests, so many radars, yet nothing has changed. So that is my first wish for the TV app. Maybe a little niche, but I think those that really love the app, especially on iOS, are missing both the wish lists and the gifting.
It's kind of funny, Sigmund, but I think of all the wishes that we have, this is probably the one that would make users of those features the most happy. And it's kind of low-hanging fruit because it just was taken away. So it's just giving something back that was already there. But I think this would be a way to win a lot of points with Apple TV fans if Apple wants to implement this. So I agree with you. I hope to see those features return. Now, something we've talked about in previous wish lists is shared up next queues, being able to create up next queues with your partner or a friend or a family member at home who you're watching TV with. But this is kind of a shared wish between the two of us, Sigmund. We want to take this wish even further, and we want full shared queue management in tvOS. So I want to be able to create an up next queue, not only with people who are signed into my Apple TV, but just any friend that I want to watch TV with, whether it be in person or over SharePlay remotely. And so we want the ability to create those shared queues, to decide what we're going to watch together, and even go so far as integrate it with Calendar so that you can create appointments and pre-populate your SharePlay links right there in your calendar. So this is a little bit of an amalgamation of different features that Apple has been implementing over the years, but really bringing them together in a way that just takes that TV shared experience to its fullest extent, especially for people remotely. I think this would be amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've had friends over to watch something in the cinema. We hadn't chosen ahead of time what we were going to watch. And choice paralysis is a thing, right? It really is. And I think that's just going to get you straight to the content that you're going to watch and the experience that you're going to share in. So yeah, I absolutely love that. Now, I've kind of talked about this before, but I wanted to mention it again just to beat this into existence, but I've given it a name. I'm hoping for, in the TV app, green screen, which is Apple's ecological TV viewing experience, including offline downloads, being able to download those TV shows or movies at a time where it's most ecologically friendly to do so. And also the upside to this is you would get increased quality. You wouldn't have differing bit rates because everything would be on device. And persistent storage. We're kind of back to Wish 1 there, and why that would be a plus, not just for apps that run ROMs, but would be really, really helpful for Apple as well.
I love this pick, but I especially love the name you come up with. It's just very Apple-y. And I feel like Apple has to implement it just because the name's so clever, and it would make a really great slide at WWDC. And it fits really well with the ecological efforts that the company's been up to and continues to push. So yeah, I totally see this happening, and I hope it does. My final pick for the TV app is a little more basic, but it's just something I would love to see, is just putting more emphasis on the editorial side of things. Maybe even giving that editorial content its own tab in the TV app, so it's really easy to find that stuff. I find that in my personal use of the TV app, sometimes I miss out on some of that editorial content, which is so good. And they do such a great job putting those collections together. But it just gets buried in the midst of all the stuff I want to watch and the recommendations and everything. So to have that not only more prominent, but just a dedicated space for it where they could put the editorials that the team's putting together now, as well as just fun behind the scenes stuff and trailers for upcoming releases. I think emphasizing that aspect of the TV app and giving it its own space would really benefit a lot of people and be something that people could enjoy.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's one thing about the TV app that I've noticed, and that is that there's a lot of content that is kind of repeated or doesn't necessarily need two homes within the TV app. Being able to have a certain tab for featurettes, that kind of thing, I think would be really, really helpful. And also, just adds a little more context. I also would love to see with the featurettes an easier way of being able to share those featurettes. We find our ways on this podcast and the show notes, an actual share sheet that could airdrop to an iOS device, or just copy it to the clip note of the devices for that person that's logged in at the time. That would be really, really cool. So yeah, I love that. Now, away from video and onto video games. Gaming has been a massive aspect of Apple TV, really since the inception of tvOS, and the classic Siri remote with the trackpad, still a favourite of mine. And whilst we moved on to a Siri remote that doesn't have a gyroscope, we also have access to controller support and so much more that it started to feel, from a gaming point of view, more and more like a console, with one key thing missing: a specific home for games. And so my first wish is for there to be an actual home, not just a Apple Arcade kind of like add-on that you can access from any game. That's really cool. But what I would like to do is be able to go into a game center, start up a party chat with any of my friends that are showing up online, and really having that kind of console experience, maybe even going as further as having Discord integration like most of the consoles do. And in that sense, you're kind of relying on a third party to offer something that might otherwise be complicated, although I'd imagine FaceTime would be great. With Discord, at least, you've got a way of being able to check someone's status pretty quickly and see when they're ready to play a game. So that's one of the things I'd like to see for gaming. The other thing that I would love to see for gaming, and I think would be a really important element to Apple Arcade and Apple TV gaming, is something that has been important for years on iOS, and that is Replay Kit. Now, Replay Kit is something that has been available on tvOS for a long time. We've talked about the idea of bringing that front and center to Control Center last week. But what I would love to see is a way of Replay Kit being able to live stream on tvOS, and maybe even, throw in Final Cut integration with the Final Cut for iPad and what they're doing with multicam. That could be quite interesting as well. That's what I've got from the online perspective of gaming. One other thing that I would love to see, and I think should be available on every gaming console or platform that exists, is the ability to have LAN party options so that I can connect multiple Apple TVs in one household, connect them all to monitors, and just have an experience that doesn't necessarily rely completely on the internet. That I would love to see happen, and maybe we see classic games later on come to tvOS and Apple TV from developers and publishers that are looking to breathe life into some of the classic games, online games. How amazing would it be to be able to set up a LAN party for Halo, for example, on Apple TVs? And it would be a considerably cheaper option than there have been in previous generations, needing, big stonking PCs and a number of them. You could have like 4 setups at $179 a piece. So they are my gaming picks for this year, Devon. What are your thoughts?
I like this set of picks. It covers a large swath of the gaming experience, from more modern things like Discord, throwing it all the way back to LAN parties. I like it. There's a lot of things that the Apple TV could do in the world of gaming, kind of expand its footprint there, and like you said, really become more of a console, which I think it is for a lot of people, but to just make it even better performing in that sense, I really like these ideas and hope to see them come to fruition. Now let's talk about apps, Sigmund, because we also install apps on the Apple TV. It has a whole app store. I imagine you've heard of it and spent some time there. But there's one app in particular that I think it's really surprising isn't on tvOS, and it's actually one from Apple, and that's Books. Now, hear me out. I'm not necessarily thinking about someone pulling up the book on their Apple TV and scrolling through the page and reading it, although there may be some people who would very much enjoy doing that, so I think it probably should be an option. But also, too, audiobooks. The Books app is where those live. We have the ability to listen to podcasts and music on the Apple TV, but not audiobooks. I think as a platform, it would be great for it to offer that option as well. So hope to see the Books app announced for tvOS this year.
I'm sure from a parent perspective as well, the ability to be able to play maybe a child's book on there and have that visual stimuli is going to be really, really cool. And a great alternative to, say, another episode of Peppa Pig where the sounds and everything have someone so engaged and so hyped up. So something like this would be very cool on that aspect of things as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful as well. Anything we can do to promote reading with the young ones, I'm all for, Sigmund.
Now, taking it back a little bit to last year's tvOS 17 review that I wrote at Mac Stories, and I ended it by talking about the ability of Apple TV maybe being an entry point to computing, especially in developing countries. This is something that I still believe could be a possibility if Apple would only introduce cursor or mouse support, which I talked about briefly last week in terms of how it could be important for gaming. But from a productivity standpoint, the thing that I really want to see this year is Apple to introduce access to their online suite of iCloud apps, Pages, Numbers, and so much more. I think that would be really, really cool just to be able to very quickly look at something, maybe an edit that someone's made. Or if we want to, we could even go an extra step and allow remote access to a Mac, maybe back at work. We don't always carry all of our devices with us. And whilst we do have access most of the time, to be able to quickly log in and be on a big screen, I think would be really, really cool. So I'm hoping that that's something that could come. But yeah, iCloud Online Suite access this year, hopefully. tvOS 18.
It's really ambitious, Sigmund. I like it a lot. I think the web could be a great starting point for getting some of these productivity tools on the Apple TV and making it kind of that really light computer that you're talking about. But I'm actually going to take it one step further because your idea got me thinking about visionOS and how visionOS pulls off expanding some of its lineup of apps without doing any extra work. And that's, of course, by offering iPad apps on its platform. And so if in this scenario tvOS gets cursor support and it's running an A-series chip which powers some of at least the lower end iPads, why couldn't we see iPad apps come to tvOS as sort of a stopgap as the OS develops in this direction if this is the way that Apple ends up going? And so rather than even having to go to a web browser to go to Pages on iCloud.com, why not just run the iPad version of Pages? Now, of course, you'd need a file system behind that and the Files app, which a lot of people have thoughts about and feelings about how that one works. But, I mean, I personally would love the ability to do that on the big screen and take those files with me. And like you said, when I go to a hotel room, just pull them up on the biggest screen available and start working. So I think that's taking things even further than your wish of using the web as the kind of the way out, but just running iPad apps, I think it'd be awesome. And I feel like the underlying technology is there. It just has to be ported over to tvOS. And I know that's a big job, but it would really add some capability to the platform for sure.
And I'll whisper it again, Devon, going back to the first wish on our list, persistent storage.
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely have to see that. Now, if they won't do all of that, I understand that that's my wish. That's what I'm hoping for. But can we at least get a weather app on tvOS? Finally came to the iPad a couple years ago, but it's weird. I don't know why, but sometimes I'm sitting in my living room, I'm watching something, and I want to check the weather. Maybe I'm a little too obsessed with that. But if I could have either a full weather app, or if not that, at least a widget just to show me current conditions somewhere in Control Center on the home screen, yeah, I would love the ability to check the weather on tvOS.
I can't remember the name of it, but there was an app years and years ago on tvOS, and the developer, he ended up working at Apple. I think it was like a daily forecast. You had lots of different things that you could kind of rearrange and stuff that was based on your location, which gave you a brief kind of summary of your day. Something like that has been available on Google Chrome for a long time. I would love to see something like that come to Apple TV, even if it's just at the point where you are like waking the TV first thing in the morning and it comes up, and then you press the back button and you're back into the main experience. So I love this. Just more really to reflect on where you are in the world.
Most definitely, like a daily summary type thing would be very cool on tvOS. They have that on your iPhone when you wake up in the morning. They say good morning and give you some of that very basic data. Having that up on the big screen would be awesome as well. Now, of course, last year we got camera support in tvOS via continuity camera, something that we've been hoping for quite some time, but we're not going to sit back and just leave it as is, at least not with our wishes, Sigmund. What are we hoping for when it comes to camera support on tvOS?
Well, and this is a really late entry into our list because it came to me during our pre-show talk. And that's the ability to have a device that acts as a persistent camera and that is constantly connected, which could open up the TV experience to so much more. And I think we're going to get into some of those possibilities in a moment, but kind of just going back to continuity camera, there are a number of different options that carried over from continuity camera on Mac to tvOS. The thing that was missing for me was studio lighting. And I think this is the one that really needed to be there. How many times do we jump onto FaceTime for a share play call? And when we're watching video, it's normally at night, right? Unless you're a big fan of lamps everywhere, which I am. Even still, normally it's too dimly lit. So a way of continuity camera being able to process that video for it to be lighter and more recognizable is something that I feel like should have been there from day dot. I think it's an oversight, and I'd love to see that come to continuity camera this year. Studio lighting. Yeah,
makes a ton of sense to me. Another integration with continuity camera on the Apple TV is Apple Music Sing. You can have a lot of fun singing with a partner, seeing yourself up on the big screen as you're doing your karaoke night. But there's no way to capture that video and save it for later. So I'd love the ability to save Apple Music Sing videos, and as well as integrate with some kind of microphone system, whether that be using your iPhone or USB microphone or something else to record your voice as well. So you can have those memories of karaoke night to save for later.
Yeah, I love this, and I may have a solution for you coming. But we'll talk about that another time. People detection. To me, this would be a massive get for continuity camera. And that is the idea of being able to walk into a room, if you've got a persistent camera, and then having those recognized faces that were previously a feature of Apple home cameras. I think that would be really, really cool. Be able to auto log in. It might be able to detect multiple people and then work out if we're going into a for all of you session. I think there's a lot available here. And it is kind of amazing, really, if you think about it, that a year on, we're even talking about a whole section for camera connectivity. But the last that I'm going to go with is something that I just feel like is a natural progression for Apple and Apple TV and the way that things seem to be heading. We've seen throughout the years lots of additions to accessibility. And one that I think is missing, and I really hope comes soon, are hand gestures. To be able to go home by doing magic hands, for example, would be really, really cool. And I think there would be something here. Now, it could just be an extension of Vision OS and the Apple Watch with double tap. I would love to see us move away from controls and into something more human and more interactive.
Yeah, I get stuck without my remote or even my phone when I'm watching something all the time, and I get to a point where a show ends and I need to get out before it starts the next episode or adjust the volume or something. And to be able to wave my hands in a certain way and get to do that would be amazing. I think hand gestures is an area that Apple's doing a ton of work in between, like you mentioned, Vision OS and Apple Watch and other areas. I hope we see some of that come to Apple TV in the future as well, maybe even as soon as this year. And moving on to home and automation. This is an area that we talk about a lot. Something I like to remind people of is that Apple really does think of the Apple TV as being within their home category. That's something that I would just like to see that story continue to be pushed. And there are a couple ways that I think that they could do that this year that would really impress me. First up, just a full-fledged home app for tvOS. The ability to control not just cameras and their adjacent accessories, which we can currently do through Control Center, which is a great feature, but it just feels like we should take that next step and just get full home access on the Apple TV. It's the home hub, so it's already aware of and connected to all these devices. So all those connections are already there. We just need the ability to control them, make quick changes, set scenes, and things like that just straight on the Apple TV with a home app, I think would make a lot of sense. Beyond that, I would really like the Apple TV to become a home dashboard when you're not streaming. I think this is just something that makes a lot of sense, either as a screensaver, which I think there's a lot of possibilities there in terms of what you could do and showing what's going on in your home, or as a widget, either in Control Center or even on the home screen, just a way to see an overview of your home. What lights are on? Are my doors locked? Just very basic stuff like that. Again, the Apple TV is the hub of the HomeKit setup. It has all this data. It's just not surfacing it in a way that we can use. And as the biggest screen in my home that, is on a lot of the time when I'm not using it directly, again, a lot of the time I like to have photos going, but if I could have some home information there as well, I think that would be really useful. And having it as a dashboard could even be a step towards, we hear all the time about a HomePod with a screen, which I think would be helpful in a lot of ways, but a lot of people already have an Apple TV hooked up to a screen, and that information would be just as useful there.
For home and automation, I've chosen the use of HomePod microphones to talk to people via home cameras. Right now, we've talked previously about the wish of, if someone rings the doorbell, being able to talk, but actually, instead of just that, being able to actually choose a camera within Control Center and see something and interact with someone right there and then, I think would be really, really cool. And of course, we have all of the microphones that we need on HomePods already in our room. So yeah, there's no reason why this couldn't happen. This is a bit of a niche one. Right, I don't know how many people are taking their Apple TVs with them. Maybe Apple should bring out an Apple TV Go. But what I'd love to see is for the current Apple TV to have an away mode so that I can quickly turn off the home integration when taking Apple TV on holiday. Just a really simple one, I think.
We have heard of people who have taken their Apple TVs on vacation and gotten the HomeKit location for their home boggled and set to some hotel that's hundreds of miles away from where they live. I've not experienced that myself personally, but I have gone through the experience of having my HomeKit home location move for some reason or another, some kind of glitch in the system that thankfully got worked out. But when that happens, so many things break that you don't even think of. You come home to a dark house. If you're using CarPlay, your garage door opener doesn't come up. when you pull up to your house, which is something that I've just taken for granted all these years. And so there are so many reasons why you don't want that location to get messed up. So anything Apple can do to protect that, I'm all for. I think this is a good addition, because the Apple TV is something that when you're traveling, if you're going to a hotel with some other operating system that you're not used to, that doesn't have your apps, you could just bring your Apple TV and hook it up and have a much better experience, but you don't want to risk messing up your HomeKit setup.
Yeah, I do not have an experience where my home has been messed up, because I do turn it off manually. But I think if your Apple TV can detect that you're in a different location to where you would normally be, then that should just be something that just automatically happens. Lastly, I want to talk about automations. Right, we've had plenty of wishes when it comes to shortcuts. Specifically, I had a wild wish in terms of Apple TV being a shortcut hub, so that multiple users could have their shortcuts stored there, and then if your iOS device, for example, runs out of juice, you're still able to action that shortcut, which is not something that happens today. And it's one of the main reasons why I think if that happens to you once or twice, you kind of give up on shortcuts in that mode of doing things via Siri. Apple TV has its own shortcut actions, and they were introduced when shortcuts were introduced, and we've seen nothing new in terms of additions since. The ability to just be able to turn on dim flashing lights, or the enhanced audio, would be really, really cool. So again, like a very kind of small wish there, which I think could be implemented over the course of the tvOS 18 beta cycle, is to at least have a few new shortcut action additions this year.
Well, I love playing with shortcuts and creating different automations for things I do in my life. And I have created some automations for the Apple TV before, but like you said, it's pretty rudimentary. It hasn't come along in a long time. And so I think any changes and additions there would be amazing. Other additions that we're always looking for on the platform and celebrate when they do come are accessibility options, making the Apple TV available and usable to more and more people. So what wishes do you have, Sigmund, in terms of accessibility this year?
Well, I just think this one would be a fun one. Film haptics. We had the announcement of music haptics for Apple Music just this past week. I would love to see the same for film. I would love people to be able to feel a particular scene in a film or a TV show, or just add to that experience into the immersion, or offer something that would otherwise be lost in translation, right, for particular accessibility needs. But from a cinema goer's perspective, I think that it could be quite handy as well. I have not particularly been to a 4D experience. It's one of those things that I'm shocked to say I have not ticked off on my list. But one thing I have experienced in a home theatre showroom is butt kickers. These are things that basically you put underneath your seat and they work alongside the audio and give you that kind of extra punch, especially during action films. It's pretty incredible stuff. And so there are two kind of use cases for this, from an accessibility haptics point of view, but also from a home cinema enthusiast point of view. You could use the same signal for two different use cases. So that is my first, and that is film haptics, following on from music haptics, announced just a week ago. Following on from that, I would love to see an Apple TV shared video stream from Apple Vision Pro to show blacked out DRM'd content. Right now, whenever I'm having friends round, I'm demoing the Apple Vision Pro to them, and we have so much fun checking out all of the pinch gestures and the navigation, photos, that kind of thing. But then when it comes to immersive video, it's very much a one-person experience, and I would love for people to be able to experience what the main user is seeing, and not just be completely shut out. So specifically for demo purposes, I would love to see this happen. Another thing that I'd like to see, and I can't remember if this is a wish that I've already mentioned before in previous wishes. If so, I'm sorry, but it bears repeating. And that is video handoff. We've had audio handoff for forever now. And I believe, when you're handing off audio from your iOS device to a HomePod, for example, it's using ultra wideband in some way to be able to do that. And so I thought, this is just not a possibility for Apple TV. However, what I realized when restoring an Apple TV recently was that I can load all of my iCloud data and everything by literally just taking my phone over to an Apple TV, getting it close enough, and it copies all of the data through my iCloud credentials. Well, there must be a way of being able to do video handoff in the same way, I would imagine. I don't think it's a technological impossibility. And so that's what I would love to see. And I think, once again, especially for parents that, are trying to keep their kids entertained whilst maybe rushing out of the house, there is a way of bringing your child with you by just very quickly handing off that video. Also really helpful, if you're starting off the day watching the news and you want to continue that in the car. There we are. It's nice and easy for me to say it. I'm hoping on a technical aspect, it's just as easy to actually pull off.
I would definitely use this. There are so many things that I watch on my phone because I'm about to head out the door, whereas I could have started them on the bigger screen, enjoyed them that way, and then taken them with me. And instead, I just watch them all on the smaller screen. So this is something I would definitely take advantage of. I would love to see it come this year, video handoff. My pick in terms of accessibility is one that is actually coming to iOS and iPadOS this year. It wasn't announced for tvOS, but it's one I would love to see come, and that's eye tracking. I mentioned when I first got the Apple Vision Pro that I took it off and tried to use my TV and immediately wondered why my TV wasn't working because I would look at an icon and it wouldn't select it. And of course I had to use the remote, but I'd just gotten so used to using my eyes to control things that it's just so natural. And so I feel like with camera support coming to Apple TV, that eventually, hopefully within the near future, we could get eye tracking control for Apple TV as well. For those who can't use the remote and have to usually rely on maybe voice control, this would be a great alternative option. I think for this year, if this wish doesn't come true, of course, doing it on iOS is going to be an option. You can use the remote app and control that with your eyes, which I think is awesome. But being able to control the entire Apple TV interface with your eyes would be incredible and one of those experiences that would just make so much sense. And it would go along with what you were talking about earlier with hand gestures and just make for a really intuitive and, like you said before, much more human and just easy experience for controlling your TV.
It's really interesting that you said this because I initially took it as oh wow, this sounds like something for 2034, right, as opposed to 2024. But then I actually started to think from an accessibility point of view, there are people with those needs that need to navigate life and computers and whatnot just with their eyes. So being able to have some way of tapping into that system to be able to control Apple TV would be absolutely incredible. And again, I'm really, really hopeful that this does come. A fantastic pick.
I think that's all I had on my wish list, Sigmund. Did you have any kind of miscellaneous grab bag picks to throw in at the end?
Of course I did. I'd be letting you down if I didn't, Devon. Just a couple of miscellaneous picks here. So the first one being custom video interactive screensavers for multiple applications. For example, you might be using an Apple TV in a showroom. Weirdly, Apple have always had access to being able to put on their custom screensavers in Apple stores. I've had a look around the settings at a time when all of that wasn't locked down on the displays. And so I would just like to be able to have the ability to be able to go, okay, maybe I'm a film studio, right? And I want just to have on repeat a reel of my work, there just isn't a way of being able to do that on Apple TV. It's just a feature that's been available on like tiny streaming sticks and USB for forever now. You just plug it into the TV and it works. So it's just a bit of an anomaly that Apple don't have that available. And then the other is ultra wideband for child detection. So hear me out on this one. I've always thought that it would be really cool to have like a wearable mode for AirTag. I know some people use AirTag for their pets. I think for smaller children, this could be really, really cool as well. I know, I can see you wondering, like, where does this tie in with Apple TV? Well, my thought was always that you could use ultra wideband in a clever way, where, for example, if a child was wearing an AirTag and they walked into the room when you're watching something that maybe is not something that younger eyes should be looking at, that it would detect the child coming into that space and automatically either blur or pause that content so that they don't accidentally see something that they shouldn't. And it's just something that I've always thought of in terms of protecting younger children from, harsher content that is available. As the years have gone by, the boundaries keep getting pushed as to what is shown on traditional TV, and I'd say even more so now with streaming. And so I think it would be a really, really clever tool, especially, adults that are wearing AirPods and then not aware of their children lurking behind them and then not knowing to pause on their own accord. So that was just a little thing that I had there for ultra wideband and how that could be used in conjunction with the Apple TV, and another use case for AirTags. Very much doubt this is coming at any point, but it's something that I hope Apple look into.
Well, little I, Sigmund, they're always wondering. They take in everything. That's something I've learned very quickly with my son. And, even stuff that you think is innocuous, you still have to be careful about, what you're playing around your kids. And so I think any features that could protect them would be great. And I think this ties back into something you were talking about as far as people detection and automation. All these things kind of tie in together. If we had these triggers and automation options available to us, we could at least combine them ourselves if Apple doesn't want to build the feature and create something like that. Another thing I thought of as you were sharing this pick is the Apple Watch, which is actually becoming a lot of children's first Apple device now, because you can do them independent from the iPhone and use it as a way for them to communicate and also keep track of them as they're going to and from different places that they're going to. Of course, the Apple Watch has UWB built into it, so that would be another option for using this sort of thing. So I would love this, and I think this would fit in really well with some of the other picks that you've shared as well. But it's not just the two of us sharing wishes today. We put out a call to our listeners to share their wishes as well. We got a few submissions that I thought were really interesting. Let's start with Aaron Pierce, who said, "I'd love for the Apple TV to be able to support more than 2 HomeKit cameras being remotely accessed when it's a HomeKit hub." Now, this is a limitation I wasn't aware of, but certainly something that Aaron is familiar with all of his home development and the great home apps that he creates. And so kind of going back to developer tools and just making more things available to people, this seems like a limitation that probably made sense at a time, but with the hardware that we have now, I think we could probably push past that 2-camera limit when an Apple TV is being used as a HomeKit hub.
Yeah, I was shocked that this was a limitation, given that we have, I think, like unlimited cameras now for certain tiers of iCloud Plus. A real strange one, really well unearthed there by Aaron Pierce. Our next listener wish comes from Finn Voorhees, who says, "I'd like to enable or disable a VPN automatically when opening or closing certain apps, but I'm sure that will never happen." And I think I echo those thoughts, Finn, because I don't think they will ever happen either. However, and I'm sure we'll get into this in the future with Home Assistant during the in-between phase of tvOS 18 betas and the public release, because there are ways of being able to do this, even if it's not necessarily per app. but there might be ways.
And this is another solution that more shortcuts actions would solve as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a system feature, but if we had those automation options, then we could build it ourselves and have the system that way. This makes a lot of sense for people who live in regions but want to be able to access streaming services from other places, but don't want their Apple TVs to be full-time devices living in those other regions. They just want to be able to have that option for certain services. And so I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think shortcuts might be a viable solution here, or as you mentioned, there are other options that we can get into in the future. Finally, Tim Chatton wrote in and said, the one feature I really am dying for with the TV app is a time filter in the library. It would be incredible to show me movies I own that are 90 minutes or shorter, or even maybe 2 hours and 10 minutes to 3 hours long. This is a key factor in deciding what I'm able to watch on certain nights. Now, I echo this feeling as well. When I go to watch something, the first thing I do is check, okay, what's the time commitment here, right? Within the player, it's great because the Apple TV will even show you like what time, your time, something will be over, which is a really great feature, but that's having to actually start the content. Or even just to get the runtime, you have to go into the title's details, which when you're trying to quickly pick something to watch, that can be time consuming, and then you've lost time that you could have been watching whatever it is you were going to watch. So some kind of filtering in the library to be able to say, I have this much time to watch something, so show me my options. I think this makes a lot of sense and would be a great addition to the library.
I love, love, love this wish. And the first thing I thought when I read this was, is Tim a make movies longer or a make movies shorter cap wearer? I'm definitely a make movies shorter cap wearer at the moment, considering the longer experiences we had last year, especially theatrically. But yeah, I love this. And what a great way to end our 2024 WWDC wishes. I think amongst last week's episode and this week's episode, we've covered so much. There's lots and lots of potential here for Apple TV. I'm really happy that we have a place here where we really try and suss out where the next evolution is in tvOS and the Apple TV experience.
Hope springs eternal, Sigmund, and it won't be long now, so we'll definitely be keeping an eye out during the WWDC keynote to see which of these wishes come true. But for the time being, how about we switch back to this week and talk about what's happening in the news, starting with app news. There's a new app for helping you make the most of your streaming subscriptions. It's coming this Saturday, June 1st. Seasons from Y&V Studios let you track which services you're subscribed to and which shows you want to watch, helping you decide when you can take a break from a particular service and when to turn that subscription back on. I got a chance to try this in test flight, Sigmund. It's a really cool concept for an app, especially in a time when so many people are so cost conscious, of course, about streaming services. The prices are going up, and of course we're seeing all these bundles come up to try and help make that easier. But what this app allows you to do is set the shows and films that you want to watch, set out a content calendar for what's going on, and then it can advise you on which services to subscribe to and cancel based on what's happening. So if there's a particular month where there's a lot of things happening on Disney Plus that you're going to want to watch, it can recommend to you, hey, you might want to sign back up for Disney Plus and knock out some of this stuff. And maybe this month you don't need Peacock because there's not as much happening there. And so really cool concept. It actually has a few different options for strategies. There's one strategy where you literally just have one streaming service at a time, and it tells you which one to get and which shows to catch up on while you've got it, and the next month you switch. So, I mean, that's a pretty cool way of saving money and really maximizing the time that you're spending with these services. So, Seasons, it's a cool concept. It's coming out in the App Store this Saturday. You can pre-order it now. And, of course, we'll leave a link down in the show notes for you.
Very, very cool concept. Kind of tied in well with one of our wishes from this year, which was screen time, right? In a roundabout way, especially when it came to the amount of time we're using a specific service or app. I love this. Now, when it comes to the streaming story, we've talked about bundles, but something we haven't talked about for a while is the partnership between Canal Plus in France and Apple TV Plus. And now Canal Plus subscribers can access Apple TV Plus in the Apple TV app for free. If you have a Canal Plus account, you can follow the link in the show notes to pay your subscription to your Apple ID account, at which point you can open up the TV app to find the Apple TV Plus channel. And if you already subscribe to Apple TV Plus, really clever here, by linking the accounts, the process will automatically handle your billing adjustments so that you don't pay twice by accident, which I think is very, very clever.
Now, if you're a subscriber to the Paramount Plus streaming service and you have an Apple Vision Pro, you may have noticed this week that the streamer is now offering a Vision OS native version of its app. I was really surprised this week. I went to the home screen on my Apple Vision Pro and I saw the Paramount Plus app in the regular icon grid instead of down in that compatible apps folder where it used to live. And I was really happy to see that. Of course, we've talked about different streamers who have chose to be on the platform and those who haven't, and the different approaches that they're taking. But it seems like Paramount Plus is actually doubling down on Vision OS as a platform, which is great to see. I tried it out, and I think it's well done. It integrates with the TV app, which you love to see. It has the ornament navigation on the side, so it's a good player on the platform in the sense of adopting some of those features and navigation. There are a couple little quirks with it. When you resize the window, sometimes the dynamic resizing of the content inside of it can get a little funny. Still a little bit of work to be done there. And then one really interesting thing pointed out by someone we mentioned earlier, Tim Chatton, is that when you're watching content in Paramount Plus on Vision Pro and you try to pause it with your AirPods, it doesn't actually pause the content. It'll start up whatever audio you were listening to before because the video player is not integrating with the system audio system. So if you're watching something in Paramount Plus and you go to Control Center, you can see your Vision Pro doesn't think anything's playing. Very, very interesting. I'm not sure how they got themselves in that situation with their video player because it works on other platforms, just not on Vision OS. So that's something that needs to be fixed as well. But regardless, I'm really happy to see this become a Vision OS native app. It's much better than the iPad version that was on there before. And as someone who does subscribe to Paramount Plus and watch quite a bit on there, I'm really happy to see this.
I'm a Paramount Plus subscriber as well, except I don't have VPN support currently on my Apple Vision Pro because I'm an ExpressVPN subscriber and they do not currently support an app, iPad compatible or otherwise, which is a real bummer for me. But when that support does come, the thing that I want is environments in Paramount Plus. I can think of a few places I'd like to be. Maybe Beavis and Butthead's living room. Maybe different places in South Park. Maybe the coffee shop or the lecture hall from Frasier. That would be kind of cool. One environment that I never want to be in, though, is the courtroom. This week we got the full trailer for Presumed Innocent coming June 12th to Apple TV Plus. We talked about the preview trailer not that long ago and really had to skirt around spoilers from someone that has seen the feature film on which this is based on. All I can say about this particular adaptation is wow, 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 wow. You can look forward to that when it debuts on June 12th. Now, in terms of release news, we do have some sad news, and that is the reality that Still Up will not be returning to our screens for a second season on Apple TV Plus, which I've got to say I'm really surprised by. This is a British situational comedy that if you haven't checked out, you should be checking out. Really, really fun. But also the characters just felt really relatable on so many different levels. So I was really surprised that we didn't get a renewal Still Up. And it kind of got me asking the questions, Devon. What is it Apple are looking for in terms of renewal? I think earlier this year, when we talked about criminal records, we talked about how budget conscious a production like that would be, and therefore that's why we would expect to see following seasons, and that's how I felt about Still Up. So what is it you think that Apple are looking at now? Is it cost to produce? Is it the quota of plays?
Yeah,
I'm confused.
I'm confused as well. It's tough to know what exactly Apple's looking for. Of course, we don't have any numbers of how many people watched or how many people signed up to watch Still Up and what they're looking for there. And of course, the approach is constantly changing as they're adding new territories and new content partners, people who are producing for them, and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't. We've got a lot of comedy on Apple TV Plus. I love all of it. And so I was actually hoping to see Still Up continue, but maybe they felt like there wasn't room in the genre for that, at least on this service. They didn't want to oversaturate with comedy. Maybe they're moving in a more serious direction with some of those priorities. The other thing I thought of was the way that Apple TV Plus, especially as a very young streamer that's just getting started, in order to exist in certain territories, has to produce a certain percentage of its content in those local territories. And so as it's expanding into more and more places, we're going to see the distribution of those local productions change. We've seen a lot of UK productions come to Apple TV Plus, and I think the service is better for that. I think the service is always better for bringing in diverse perspectives from other parts of the world and bringing in creatives just who are in different places and producing different things. But this could have been something that was brought on in order to help boost that quota, and then maybe wasn't necessary later on as different British productions came on board. Maybe that's a little bit cynical. I don't love to look at things that people put their hearts and souls into that way. But unfortunately, sometimes, business decisions get made in ways that we don't necessarily agree with. Regardless, I loved Still Up for what it was. I think it's still worth watching. It'll give you a laugh. Ultimately, sometimes that's all we need out of a TV show, is just to make us laugh. And it really did that for me, and I'm sad that it won't be returning.
To some more positive news, and that is a bit of an exclusive on a coming soon. We're expecting the announcement of Omnivore, the upcoming documentary food series, pretty soon. It's narrated by renowned chef Reni Redzepi and is a global series exploring the ingredients that built societies, shaped beliefs, and forever altered the human story. From salt flats in Peru to coffee forests in Rwanda to wild tuna off the coast of Spain, each episode of Omnivore will celebrate the way we grow, transform, and consume the world's best resources, the ones we eat. And what I can say exclusively is that this series will contain 8 episodes, so hopefully we'll hear more about that soon. But it is a show that we've been waiting for quite a while now. I think over a year since its initial announcement.
Yeah, I'm excited for news of this to be popping back up, and just hear rumblings that it's coming in the not too distant future. We don't know a date yet, but we'll be keeping an eye out, and of course let everyone know as soon as we know when it's coming. And I can't wait to watch this one when it does come to Apple TV Plus. In development news, Apple has ordered new crime series Identity from Anonymous Content. The show is written by Zoe Ward and Ria Tabakowola, with David Matthews attached as showrunner. It will follow Marcus Jobson, a British-Jamaican developer living in New York, who is forced to confront his violent past when his estranged gangster brother from Jamaica arrives in the city, determined to establish a major criminal enterprise. Production is expected to begin next month in New York. No casting news on the series, but if they're filming next month, I bet we'll find out more about who's involved very soon.
You may have to take another trip and start doing some spoofing like last time, Devon.
In casting, Kyle MacLachlan, Fiona Shaw, and Edmund Donovan have joined the cast of Apple original thriller film Echo Valley, led by previously announced stars Julianne Moore, Sydney Sweeney, and Domhnall Gleeson. The film centers on Kate, a horse trainer at Echo Valley Farm, whose daughter Claire arrives on her doorstep one night, scared and covered in someone else's blood. We haven't heard about this film in a minute. I believe it filmed last year, so it's cool to hear a little bit more about the cast, but hopefully this is just kind of that process revving back up, getting ready to start promoting the film. Hopefully we'll get to see it soon.
Finally, in awards news, the 40th Annual Sports Emmy Awards happened, and Super League, The War for Football, took home both Outstanding Documentary Series and Outstanding Graphic Design in the Speciality category. It was a documentary series that, whilst being quite niche, really opened up the world of football and politics in football. And it's interesting because it kind of forms a bit of a subplot towards what we are expecting to be an announcement of Apple getting the World Club Championships from FIFA. So highly recommend checking out Super League, the War for Football. Whether you're a football fan or whether you're a politics fan, I think you will find something in this. And again, it's going to give you a great backdrop to what we hope is going to be a very exciting World Club Championships if that tournament actually ends up going ahead.
Well, before we get into this week's releases, I wanted to take just a minute to share with you about Club Mac Stories. Sigmund, it's been, I think, 4 months now since we joined Mac Stories, which is a website you might be familiar with. But what you might not know is that Mac Stories has grown into much more than just a website. After 15 years, the website's still going strong, but now also includes a family of great podcasts, including this one and Club Mac Stories. And the club is unique among everything we do at Mac Stories because it's more of the same in the best possible way. More app coverage and in-depth stories about Apple and everything surrounding it through weekly and monthly newsletters, club-exclusive automations, discounts, and giveaways, extended episodes of some of our podcasts, a Discord community where you can connect with a smart group of people who share your interests, live audio events, special club-only newsletters, and more. It really is the perfect way to get the most out of everything we do at Mac Stories. There are 3 membership levels, each with its own set of perks. And because memberships start at just $5 a month, it's easy and affordable to give Club Mac Stories a try. So to learn more and find the right plan for you, visit plus.club today.
Now, without further ado, it is time for us to go through this week's Apple TV releases, which are once again plentiful, Devon. Last Friday saw, of course, the release of Experience Immersive and its update on Apple Vision Pro, alongside Parkour, which we talked about at the top of the show. Death-defying stunts happening there with no safety net, which honestly had me very concerned, but utterly entertained. But going away from those type of superheroes to a completely different universe, today is a very exciting day for Marvel fans.
That's right. Today sees the release of Marvel Studios' What If, an immersive story, as a free app on Apple Vision Pro for Disney Plus subscribers. This is a mixed reality experience. It kind of starts off, from what I understand, we haven't actually gotten to experience it at the time of recording, but from what I've seen, it starts off within your own space. The Watcher comes in and recruits you to help save the multiverse, and then Sorcerer Supreme Wong comes through a portal and teaches you how to cast spells with your hands, which is your interaction throughout the experience. Very cool. At certain points, it becomes a totally immersive experience as well, so there's a blending there. But what you're doing throughout these hour-long experiences, you're going through different parts of the Marvel multiverse, coming across characters that you know, like Thanos and Hela and others, and you're fighting to save the multiverse and keep the Infinity Stones safe. As a fan of the MCU, I'm so excited for this, and as a fan of immersive content in Apple Vision Pro, I'm even more excited that Disney has partnered with Apple to make this a reality exclusively on Apple Vision Pro, which is also very cool. So I'm excited to dive into this. I'm sure we'll both have more thoughts on it next week once we've had a chance to try it. But from everything I've heard from the very early previews, it sounds like it's a really cool experience and just the kind of thing that Apple Vision Pro unlocks that nothing else can do.
Today also sees the finale of this season's Loot, which we will, of course, be recapping with our spoiler recap next week. Also, new episodes are available today for Apple Originals, including the Big Door Prize, Dark Matter, Acapulco, and Trying.
I did want to shout out this week on Trying. I learned a new British slang phrase that I thought was a lot of fun. There's a point in the episode when Princess is trying to prove her dad wrong and guess something. And when she gets it right, she gets really excited and she says, "Get in!" And that's something I'd never heard of before. And I had to Google it because I thought it was so cool. And I think I'm going to adopt that phrase in place of where someone I know might say, "Let's go." I'm going to say, "Get in." That's my new phrase that I'm adopting from trying.
Honestly, I looked on the notes and the note reads, learn a new British slang phrase with this one. And I was like, oh God, what is it going to be? Get in is the tamest example of a slang word. So I'm happy we can keep it clean here as well over on this side of the Atlantic. In terms of new game releases, a new non-arcade game release that we wanted to highlight is Squad Busters from Supercell. It's a competitive action game for iPhone and iPad featuring characters from Supercell's other games, including Clash of Clans. Of course, not available on Apple TV, but you can AirPlay, which is something that we often forget to mention when it comes to the iPhone and iPad only games during our weekly releases. Talking of games, going into a different kind of dimension in terms of immersiveness, the spatial version of Where Cards Fall is coming, alongside other recent arcade updates across all of your platforms, including 15 new areas added to What the Golf on Apple Vision Pro, a new level of Ridiculous Fishing X, the Garbage Patch on iOS, and new character in Beast Bio Exo Arena Suit Team named Splash, as well as updates to What the Car, Bloons TD Battle 2 Plus, Tamagotchi Adventure Kingdom, Solitaire Stories, and Fruit Ninja Classic Plus. I think this may be the first time we've mentioned Tamagotchi Adventure Kingdom. I remember having one of the originals. Drove me nuts and then died very, very quickly.
Oh.
On Friday, we see a new episode of The Big Cigar, followed by in the evening, Friday Night Baseball, Detroit Tigers at Boston Red Sox at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then the Los Angeles Angels at Seattle Mariners at 10 p.m. Eastern. On Saturday and Sunday, we see the continuation of MLS Season Pass. If that wasn't enough, there's also some extras to delve into. Dark Matter, what's coming this season, a sneak preview with a pretty big spoiler, alongside a day in the life of Apple TV Plus graphic designer Gina Alessi, a great article direct from the Creative blog. Both extras, of course, we will link in the show notes. Now, last week, amongst an incredible lineup of Apple originals across TV, games, and immersive experiences, we saw the finale for Franklin, which we're about to go into spoiler territory with our recap. In December 1776, Benjamin Franklin is world famous for his electrical experiments, but his passion and power are put to the test when he embarks on a secret mission to France, with the fate of American independence hanging in the balance.
You are? I am Benjamin Franklin. The Congress has sent me here as a representative of the United States to enlist France in our war against England. America requires men, money, and arms. Without your aid, the United States will end before it has begun.
This is, of course, based off of Stacy Sheaf's book, A Great Improvisation, Franklin, France, and the Birth of America, with an incredible cast, including Michael Douglas in his first ever period piece as Benjamin Franklin, and Noah Jupe as Temple Franklin, his grandson. Now, Devon, we both got to experience this fascinating historical story. Incredible set design, incredible production. But what did you think of Franklin?
I will say it's a really interesting and fascinating and historically important story that I enjoyed seeing retold. But I'll say overall, personally, I think it might have been told a little bit too slowly and in depth. I wonder if this part of Franklin's life, while it is of course worth retelling because it is very interesting, the political intrigue alone, I think, is fascinating, and the impact that it had on the future of, American history, of course, can't be understated. But I think it might have worked a little bit better as a shorter series, maybe a 2 or 3 parter, or even as a film. I think might have been a better format for this. Just the amount of time we spent with Franklin in France, getting into all the minute details of his trip, I feel like it might have dragged a little bit at points. And that's not to say it was poorly done. Like you said, the set design and the costuming and the period aspects of it were absolutely incredible. It just felt like it went a little bit longer than maybe it necessarily needed to. I'll say Michael Douglas is brilliant as always. There's a reason he's Michael Douglas and he has the reputation that he has. And he took on this role very well. He humanized Franklin in a way that I think I've not seen before. When the series first came out, I talked about how Benjamin Franklin is just a legend in American history, right? And he's this person who seems like just too big for life with everything that he accomplished, all the things that he did, and what we know about his personality. He doesn't seem human. He almost seems like a superhero in our eyes. And so to see him portrayed by someone who is just such an incredible actor and who just brings, again, such just a human aspect to him and really brings him down to earth in a way that I don't think tarnishes anything about the things that he did or the way I think about him. It just helps me realize that, as incredible as the things that he did was and the history that he lived in and the things he accomplished, he was, again, a human being. And honestly, that's inspiring in a lot of ways. But it also just, again, puts you in the mindset of thinking about what life must have been like for him to be living in such a volatile time in history, to be navigating the things that he navigated. I think, again, Michael Douglas just does a brilliant job of putting us there. I'd say the weakest part of the series for me was probably Franklin's love life. There are several women that he flirts with and, has these will they, won't they type situations with while he's in France. And personally, to me, it just wasn't the most interesting storyline. It did bring up some important points about the rights of women at the time. I do appreciate that aspect of it. And I'm sure it reflected the realities of his life. So from a historical perspective, it's very clear that whoever was behind this series, all the creatives were very big fans of Franklin and very big history buffs. And so they included these details just, to reflect the reality of his experience. So I appreciate that aspect of it. But I think overall, in terms of the plot and what was happening between France and the United States and what Benjamin Franklin was really there to do, I feel like it didn't contribute a lot in that area. And so those were the points where, personally, for me, it just didn't feel like the series was jibing as well. And I wonder if those parts could have been shortened to contribute to the pacing of it. You mentioned Noah Jupe, who plays Temple Franklin, Benjamin Franklin's grandson. I knew very vaguely that he had gone to France. He had done these things. I had no idea he brought his grandson along, and all these things that happened between him and Temple and Benjamin Franklin's son, who was in jail for treason, and how that plays into his relationship with Temple as well. But I will say, in terms of Temple's journey, there was some unevenness there. The show was really meant to show us how he grew out of his grandfather's shadow and came to be his own person. But I feel like it really dwelled more on his failures and then skips over some of those parts where he makes strides along the way. So Temple, a lot of times he'll go out and he'll do something he thinks is great, and then he has to come back to his grandfather and beg for his job as secretary back and go back to, his place or whatever. And very slowly he gets out of the nest and finds his own way. But there are just times where he comes back and things have changed so much for him, and we don't really know how he got there. And it really just feels like I wish we had seen more of those parts of Temple's story rather than just dwelling on, the times that he got himself into a lot of trouble and had to come back. So that aspect, again, I think actually we could have spent more time with Temple in that sense rather than seeing him in all the bad situations that he fell into. Again, I'm sure it's historically accurate and, important parts of his story. I just feel like maybe the timing was a little bit off there. There is a nice bonus in this series for Hamilton fans. I'm a huge fan of the musical Hamilton, as you know. There's a character in this show named Lafayette. And when I saw him pop up, I thought, no, that can't be the same Lafayette from Hamilton. But it is a Frenchman who came to the United States and fought in our revolution and played a pretty big role both in the Hamilton musical and also in this series. But in this series, we actually get more backstory on how he ended up coming over to the United States, as well as his relationship with Temple, which I thought was a cool crossover and just a totally different depiction of the character of this historical figure than we get in Hamilton as well. So nice little bonus there and a cool crossover to something that I really enjoyed. I'll say the show's biggest strengths are its portrayal of the period, really giving us a feeling of the time that Franklin lived in. This really was just a time of such upheaval in so many ways, new ideas flying everywhere. People had no idea what the world was going to look like tomorrow when they woke up. And I think that we really do get a sense of that from this series, and I find that so fascinating and interesting. And then just the political intrigue of it all, the way Franklin has to navigate these French officials and appear before the king and try to get this support for the revolution and all the different compromises that he has to make along the way, along with his rivalry with John Adams, played by Eddie Marsan, which I had no idea about, that he showed up in France and kind of tried to take over the whole project, and the way those two interacted with each other. It was just fascinating on that perspective to see him navigate those things and use his brilliant mind that had come up with all these scientific discoveries and different ways of doing things to apply that to people and getting the revolution funded. That was really interesting. So I will say it is solid in those two areas. As a period piece, I think it really does work. I find the political aspects of it intriguing. There were just parts of it that I felt like could have been quicker or maybe not included for the sake of time that may have made it a little bit stronger. But I did enjoy the series and the story overall.
You can, of course, check out the whole limited series of Franklin, available now in full across all of your screens on Apple TV+. Now, as we do with every week, we end our show with an up next pick or two from the TV app. What have you got for us this week?
This week, Sigmund, I am bringing Madam Web, which is now streaming on Netflix. It's the latest entry in Sony's Spider-Verse. And I know the movie's become a bit of a meme, but that's just made me want to watch it even more, Sigmund. So I'm excited that it's now available on streaming. For those who don't know, Madam Web is a superhero origin story described as a suspense-driven thriller. I think those who have seen it might describe it differently, but it follows clairvoyant paramedic Cassandra Webb, played by Dakota Johnson, who befriends three women destined to become spider-themed superheroes if they can survive their fates. Stars Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor alongside Johnson, and it also features someone you might have heard of, Sigmund, Adam Scott as Ben Parker, and Emma Roberts as his sister-in-law Mary, who is expecting a son named Peter. I feel like that guy's going places. Again, the film became a bit of a meme when it debuted in theaters, especially given some hilarious moments on its press tour. If you've seen some of Dakota Johnson's interviews when she's promoting this film, absolutely amazing. It feels like stunt marketing, right? But I don't think it is. I think it really is just her reaction. I'm excited to finally see it for myself now that it's streaming, so that I can contribute to the zeitgeist and the meme that is Madam Web, streaming now on Netflix.
Maybe this is what they were doing on the severed floor all along, Devon. We'll find out. We'll find out. Now, interesting that it's not coming to Disney Plus and it's going to Netflix, considering the MCU. However, I have one highlight this week for the TV app, one that really stuck out to me at least, and that is on Disney Plus, and that is Jim Henson, Idea Man. Of course, the great Jim Henson, the creator of The Muppets, Fraggle Rock, and so much more. I highly recommend checking that out when that releases later this week. And we end this episode with this week's Up Next pick. In fact, it's more of a TV app search pick this week for the late, great Morgan Spurlock, who was an American documentary filmmaker, writer, and television producer who directed 23 films and was the producer of nearly 70 films throughout his career, who sadly passed last week on May 23rd following a battle with cancer. He is someone that came into my mind when he received critical acclaim for his directing of the documentary Super Size Me, in which we saw him kind of live off of a diet of McDonald's to see what would happen. There was a follow-up, Super Size Me 2, in which he looked at the poultry industry and fast food and how farmers are treated, and really shocking stuff, but very, very well done. Always done in a fair way, never at all mean-spirited, very funny, very clever. But my favourite of his documentaries was a film called Pom Wonderful Presents The Greatest Movie Ever Sold. And it was basically about product marketing in the film industry and in the advertising industry, and how much product placement plays a part in the industry. And basically his whole film is about getting a film funded through product placement. It's hilarious. Highly recommend. We'll link to a number of his films in the show notes. You can revisit his great work across the TV app this week.
That's all we have for this week. Thank you everyone so much for listening. Of course, we always welcome your feedback, so be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and review there. You can also contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. You can email the show or send us an iMessage to magic@macstories.net.
We'll be back next week with a recap of Loot, our WWDC predictions, and a little pre-WWDC Apple TV project reveal. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and kick his ass, Father Rubin.